welcome to the Product Quest podcast, where Jan Vermouth, Jonathan Edwards, and myself, Scott Burleson, we're on a quest to better understand innovation, marketing, product development. In this episode, we continue our conversation with Lindsay Zaltman. If you missed the first half, you might start there first. Lindsay is CEO and partner of Olson Zaltman, a research firm that specializes in uncovering customer needs using deep metaphors. We pick up the action as I ask a question that I'm perpetually looking for insight from many practitioners about the proper balance between qualitative and quantitative research. You hit on a question that I was wanted to ask about. I just was waiting for the right time, and you mentioned it's largely a qualitative method. So with some market researcher techniques, you do a qualitative and you gather a lot of things and you have a survey, or then you go to it's a high sample to make sure you have confidence in the numbers. Mm-hmm. But certainly we've talked to researchers and that use strictly qualitative techniques with fantastic results. So I think we don't have any judgment either way, but just is yours more of a qualitative method where there's not a survey at the end, or how does it?
Yeah, exactly. So ZMET is really good at surfacing all of the jobs or needs within it, whatever, or even within a job. Sometimes that's how we're brought in also. You guys have laid the groundwork for jobs to be done, study for your clients, and now they say, oh, these two are of particular interest to us, and we can go do a deep ZMET on those two to bring them to life. But it's good at bringing those to life, kind of the overall essence, but it is qualitative. So if a client wants to see which of these are the bigger market opportunity, we can sometimes answer that qualitatively, but it's really, then you need to go quantify them in a proper study to do that. So we're very much the kind of, here are all of the ideas, and then you need some sort of quantification. But to your point too, I think, we have a lot of clients that don't go and do that quantitative step because they just feel really good about it. And sometimes you just kind of know this one's more important than that one. Or sometimes your strategy is let's do all of them, or whatever it is. And so we have a lot of clients too that just do the qualitative part as well. And I think there's no right or wrong answer. It's just your comfort level and where you kind of put your focus.
What percent of the time would you say that you feel like, based on the qualitative, we feel good about, hey, we can make some decisions and develop and do whatever we do, or it's like, we really need some more quantitative data? Do you have a sense of what that mix would be?
Yeah, I always feel really good about the qual because we've done it. So, but I think you can make a lot of decisions. I think there's some strength in numbers. I don't know the percentage. I think there's a lot of times you do. I mean, you're making a big multi-billion-dollar decision to go into this market or that market or this avenue within that market or that, big decisions being made. I think you want some strength in numbers and have some quantification to back it up. So I think in most cases, it's good to do that. But in a lot of cases, it's all of our jobs as managers, us, our clients, agencies, design firms, talk about it as being consumer-led versus consumer-informed. I think you want to be consumer-informed. You want to
elaborate on that. I think that's very important distinction.
So, you want to understand your consumer so well that you can then take them somewhere they couldn't imagine themselves, or that quantification wouldn't answer for you, because we all know, what it is about them that makes them tick, versus consumer-led or data-led in another sense. It's just, this is what the data tells us. Let's go do that. So, we like to kind of work with clients who are kind of more comfortable, or help clients start to think about that. Talk about it also in a similar way of, anticipate and lead. So anticipate what your consumers want and then lead them there. Something, they're not going to be able to necessarily articulate themselves. I think that's why we have a lot of these kind of smaller innovations, and you're successful. Someone's innovation for the year might be like, let's make the package 5% bigger, or, those aren't award-winning innovations or game-changing innovations. That's because you're listening to your customer. What do the customers say? Oh, I'd like a little bit bigger of a bag. Okay, well, they told us they want a little bit bigger of a bag. Let's make a little bit bigger of a bag, because you're led by the consumers, what they're telling you. That's not really what they want. What they want is a better experience, or something like this. And so that's where the bigger innovations happen, when us as managers say, let's, they didn't say this explicitly, but I feel pretty darn good that, we could connect the dots to this big idea. So.
Yeah, I completely agree there, because there's this danger of, okay, let me maybe take a little bit of a loop. So it's very great. I think a lot of companies have learned, okay, we have to go out to the consumer. That wasn't always the case that they did that, but I think a lot of, so I'm that old. So anyway, so they have learned this by now. But the danger is that many of them go out and then they ask exactly in the way you showed. They ask directly for solution input or solution ideas. And what can happen is that, and I just had a discussion, I think yesterday or the day before, with somebody that did exactly this. It was in a bank context or in a in the financial industry. They asked what their clients wanted, and they built this. So it was kind of a way of showing how your personal finances. And they built this, and none of the clients actually used it in the end. So if you ask them directly for the solution and you think, okay, a great idea, thank you very much, and you go and build what they told you on a surface level, what they want, that is not what they've asked for. So, and jobs to be done is a way of looking at this, and you seem to have found, or the ZMAT is another way of understanding what they want without it being exactly what they have said in a certain sense.
Yeah. That's exactly right. We did a study for Oticon, which is a Danish company, hearing aid manufacturer. I think they invented the hearing aid like 115 years ago or so, but they're one of the big players in it. It was a classic study asking people who had hearing impairment about their thoughts and feelings about hearing aids. And these were people who were told by a professional to get a hearing aid yet didn't. It's a huge part of that population. There's some stigmas around it and they just don't do it.
That's like the big questions there were.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you asked them what they wanted out of a hearing aid, they would literally say, if you could just make it a little smaller, make more skin tone color so I can get one that exactly matches my skin so I can keep hiding this thing and be, that I'm shameful of. That's what everyone in the industry was doing. And they were only getting 20%, the classic 80-20 rule. Only 20% of the people were willing to buy because of that. But that was the innovations that everyone was doing every year, just doing these little things. Oticon, after doing a study like this, start to realize that let's think about this differently, and using kind of extrapolating from a different industry, eyeglasses. Why is it that, people, it's another deteriorating sense that we have, but why is there not a shame in eyeglasses? Why, in fact, will some people pay like $1,000 for this bright purple pair of frames that's actually telling people I'm flawed, I have a sight problem? But yet you're embarrassed to do that with your hearing. And so changing the way people think about that, they came out with this really cool, Delta was the product, but it was tied to these deep metaphors that we had about transformation and freedom from containment and everything too. But the big thing there was coming out with these color patterns like, bright blues, oranges, yellows, camouflage, leopard skin, zebra. Exactly what consumers would never tell you they wanted out of a product. You would never hear, maybe make it camouflage. But that's what they did. And it came out and it sold beautifully. Everyone else in the industry went out and made similar copies of it because you really understood what they really wanted and then helped bring them to somewhere they couldn't imagine themselves. And so there's a lot of those kind of cases that out there.
Yeah, I think that's a very nice example. I mean, the hearing aid industry is, maybe that's also kind of, we did a couple of we worked a lot in the hearing aid industry. Maybe that's also something that they're telling themselves. And they're so occupied with the stigma around hearing aids. And I remember so well that I think it was 2 or 3 years ago where we did an interview with somebody in the US, and sure, she was a teenager, like 18, 19 years old, something like that. And she put like little diamonds on her hearing aid and kind of built in a hook so that you can hang on her what you would normally put on her ears, you can now put on her hearing aid. So this idea of I need to hide it, I'm ashamed of it, was completely, that was not her concern. I mean, she made it much more beautiful and used it as she turned it into a positive, which happened. The same thing happened with glasses, right? You turn a negative into something positive. And I think if you would just talk about hearing aids, then, it makes me look old, blah, 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 blah. So anyway,
that's neat.
I love the example. I'm sorry, I kind of losing myself here in the heat of the discussion, but I was wondering, you mentioned or touched upon this a little bit. kind of understanding people in a different way. And I think I've seen you somewhere say that you're even trying to understand the consumer better than they understand themselves. Now, for me, that rings a bell. I have heard that quote before somewhere. Is that, or did you come up with this? But I heard it. It's Schleiermacher in the background there, or is that not the case?
There's different ways of saying it. I first heard it from my dad, and he talks about it as uncovering what consumers don't know they know, and that's the kind of that's the essence original of that statement too. Yeah, and that's what we were talking about, earlier in the conversation. It's in there, it's in their mind somewhere, and they know it because it's in there, but they don't know that they know it. So yeah, right questions, and it brings it out, and all of a sudden they start realizing that was in there. So yeah.
Can you think of an example that sort of makes that tangible? Like, what's some example of something somebody doesn't know that they know?
We did a study with heartburn sufferers for this pharmaceutical study again too, and consumers there would talk. It was really irrational. It was fascinating, but irrational. These people all had heartburn, and they'd eat spicy food. They'd eat a spicy food or do something that they know would give them heartburn. And instead of immediately taking medication or taking medication beforehand, what they were doing is they would wait for the symptoms to come. And so they would wait for that first burn. Some people, it wasn't a set thing. Some people would wait for the first burn, and then they'd take their medication. Some people would sit with it for a half hour or an hour, whatever it is. And we're doing individual interviews, but this kind of theme was coming up. And they didn't know they knew this, but then all of a sudden, when you start exploring it deeply, they all started talking about this idea, like, you do the crime, now you got to do the time. They were punishing themselves, irrationally. They didn't have to, but they felt like, I did this to myself. I knew I was doing it to myself. So now I'm going to kind of punish myself and live with that pain a little, then take my medication. So that's just a classic example of someone not really being aware of that behavior, even going into our study, but, being aware of that behavior. But then they were starting to have this moment where they realized, that's what they're doing to themselves. So those are the kind of things.
They were unconsciously not relieving their pain because they felt like they deserved the pain a bit.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. It's kind of, which is a hugely important idea if you're a heartburn medication, to know that that's the emotion you're dealing with, guilt and, this sort of thing too. So, yeah.
What would be like if we were generating ideas, what would we do with that how is that useful information for us?
Well, I think for communications, you can take it a number of ways. One, just by showing empathy, that you understand this is what's going on here, and you could do that in a humorous angle, doing it too. But if your problem you're solving as a heartburn medication is to relieve guilt from people as quickly as possible, or stop them from even feeling guilty, something like that, you could reframe that metaphor, that emotion that they're thinking about too. The communications, I think, easier one. I don't know in the product innovation sense that there's much you can do with that insight there, but this was for communications at the time.
Is folks that bring clients that bring you in, is it mostly for innovation or mostly for marketing, or is it? I'm sure it's both, but is it more one?
It is both. I mean, it's almost 50-50. We do a lot of innovation work and early innovation work, a client getting into a new category and they want to understand it, that type of stuff, the foundational insight work, versus product testing stuff. We'll do a little bit of that, but it's not, it's even when we do that concept test kind of stuff, it's more about the metaphors and emotions than it is about, we don't do usability stuff or anything like that. But I'd say innovation is probably or product development's about half the stuff. And then the other half is marketing, communications, branding work. And as you know, they both kind of blend together. So sometimes clients are using us for both of those things.
Because a discussion we've often had is around, so I was mentioning the hierarchy of jobs before, and something we've often discussed is you need to focus on the right level of the hierarchy. There's a choice involved at some point where you say, okay, I'm not going to help people be at peace, but I'm going to help them cook a meal or something. So you try and choose the right level.
Yeah.
And I mean, I do see parallels between the depth the depth you talk about in the metaphors and the level of abstraction. I don't know if it's exactly a one-to-one thing, but I see kind of parallel there. And just to build on Scott's question, I mean, the way I understand it also in Jobs to be Done is that if you're talking about marketing and advertising, it can be really good to go into the higher abstract levels, or as you would say, in the deeper levels, the more subconscious, deep needs that people, deep metaphors that people use. And this is, so my question is basically, have you noticed the same thing in terms of how do you tailor now your technique? If you're talking about innovation, we're often going to be on a more functional level maybe, and trying to solve this. How do you tailor your technique to this issue that we've been confronted to?
Yeah, I think what you're trying to do, even if it's innovation or communications, you're right. You have to find, and I think it even sometimes differs on the nature of the topic. If it's fashion brand like kind of thing, or if it's like a choice of toilet paper. Some of these things, functionality is more important, and some of these things, emotionality is more important. So it kind of sometimes going to depend. But I do think there's a general rule of thumb. You're right. You have to figure out that like middle ground, which tends to be the more usable stuff to start innovating around or communicating around, versus just showing someone, in extreme jubilation, and you have no idea what got them there. It could have been a dishwashing detergent, or it could have been a new pair of shoes. So it's like, finding that middle ground. But I think like when we go in, when we're looking into innovation, we still want to know all of those key emotions that these ladder up to, because that can be an inspiring way to think about innovation too. Like, here's a set of, these mid-level concepts that are all about energizing. Here's a set that are all about calming, whatever. And then we can start to use that. So you need to know that higher order. And also when you then start developing products or developing communications, and you want to go out and test them with consumers, you want to know that they're, you might show them that mid-level concept. And then as you're doing your smarter interviewing, talking with them, you can say, how does this make you feel, or what? And then they can say, well, this makes me feel energized, this. And then you're like, okay, good. That's what our intention was. Even if you're not communicating it explicitly, we can ladder them up to that space around the proper energize. And if they don't say that, then you can say, okay, we're not quite there yet. We haven't tapped into the emotion we know this is specifically designed to. So ultimately in the end, you want to make sure you're, communicating the whole story, whether some of that's explicit or some of that's implicit.
By the way, I have to sneak this in. I stumbled upon it. I stumbled upon a beautiful example of what happens if you go way too high and way too abstract. So there was in I think it was just in Switzerland. I hope for the company it was just in Switzerland. I'm not going to say what the company was, but their kind of slogan, what they were pushing is that. So in English, it would be, "True living is the choice of an insurance that understands you." Now I feel like that's way too high.
Yeah,
like they're trying to build a connection up there where it's. I'm not so sure if that really is like.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that kind of. I don't know how you say it, but I understand that there is a tendency that you want to play on this level and kind of. In a certain sense, it's also true, right? I mean, I'm not just making fun of them. In a certain sense, that might actually help in a very, very distant relationship. That might actually be true, but it's not. It's not the thing that clicks. It's not what people kind of naturally think of when they think.
It's too far of a stretch, and I'm sure if you did research, you could ladder people up to that higher order thing.
Yeah,
but you're right. It's just like too far of a leap to kind of explicitly just use as and assume they can understand that.
So talking about leaps, I actually wonder if we could maybe go back a little and just define what a metaphor is a bit more formally, because I think we kind of vaguely discussed it, but I would love to dive a bit more into that.
I want to admit something before we do that. First, I went in anticipation. I was reading definitions of metaphor versus simile, and then I was immediately startled to learn that we say them every 10 to 12 seconds. So,
Yeah.
well, a lot of the things that before you define it, I just think I just didn't think of them in terms of metaphors. I think of just terms of language and slang. And now that you called them out as metaphors, I can see that more clearly. But yeah, we definitely would love to know your definition.
Yeah. So my definition, the way we think of it at our firm, is a broad definition. So we talk about metaphor. When we talk about metaphor, it encompasses simile, analogy, metaphor. So we use it in the broadest sense, recognizing that a metaphor is technically different from a simile, technically different from an analogy, but the whole space we kind of think as metaphoric thinking. And just to define it, it's literally like X is like Y. X experience is like Y experience. And that's what you're doing with the metaphor. It's like, walking on eggshells in this room. That's a metaphor for what that experience is like, doing that. So that's often just, what it is simply. And that's what we were saying earlier. It kind of comes from categorization. This is like that. So categorization theory is probably the root of it. It's just human nature to categorize things. That's what we do. When you see an animal, a cat walking down the street, you categorize it as a cat, not a dog, and so different things. And that's what, we do it as marketers too in our segmentations, categorizing all the time. But metaphor broadly is just anything in that space where you're taking one concept and applying it to another concept.
I have to share this. When I was with John Deere, we did a project. One of the hardest things about tractors is, what should the stupid thing look like? Like, you can talk about how things it needs to do faster, more efficient, all those things, but at the end, but then you have people designing things and showing you pictures. And the problem we had was, we have a designer draw them all up, and I like this one, you don't like that one, you don't like that one, and so it's like it just seemed like the stupidest, like most objectives, like going nowhere. So we had a really great consultant working with us, and I didn't think about metaphors, but what he did was we went out and did qualitative. And we got all these favorable terms for what a tractor should look like. And I remember these so well. One was it should be more of a tool than a toy. I remember that one. And this is not a political comment at all, but this is just what the data said. They wanted it to be masculine, not feminine. Now, it didn't matter who the gender of the respondent, didn't matter. The tractor needed to be tool, not toy, masculine, not feminine. And so then we had all these concepts made. We just took them to the customers, and we on a board. I mean, it was 16 feet long, and you would put tool here, toy there, and you would have them. You give them the pictures, and they would hang it on the wall. And we got all this data, and it brought some objectivity. It brought some process to this otherwise completely subjective means of what should this thing look like, and it worked amazingly well.
That's metaphoric thinking in a sense. You're not even realizing it at the time. They're doing a lot of this anyways. Just masculine versus feminine. That's a metaphor. It's a machine. It's not literally male or female. It's a bunch of pieces of metal woven together. But but that's exactly it. And that's how we think about these things, in terms of all these products, or what are those kind of conceptual metaphors that we use to think about them.
One of the interesting things about that, looking back on it, like when you evaluate a survey, one of the things you wonder about, how quickly can a customer understand it, makes sense? Well, they understood that game in a second. You didn't have to keep it. You didn't have to explain anything. You just, that's tool, that's toy. Put this paper up, put this drawing up there. And it's just like, it was so fast and easy.
Yeah. That's one of the beauties of metaphor. And I talk about that as finding the right conceptual metaphor to talk about your product. Sometimes it's with your consumers, but other times it's internal stakeholders, and you just find that right way. Our product, it's not a soft drink, it's whatever. And you kind of come up with that, and everyone's just like, I get it. I see what you mean. So yeah.
I mean, just maybe just a side note to bounce off what Scott was saying. How would this work for the functional aspect, say, of the tractor. So how would the metaphors help for the functional decisions? Because you're talking more about the design aspect.
So in that sense, imagine this kind of concept of masculine versus feminine came out in research and people talking about that kind of a thing. We would say, what specifically about a John Deere tractor is masculine, or what specifically about this concept is masculine? They'd say, oh, well, it's those big, meaty tires. That's one of those things. What is it about that tire that makes you feel that way? Well, it's just kind of burly, or it feels like it's stronger. They might, you might, if they were talking about the seat or something like that, and might say this kind of, this design here feels, more like feminine to me. Well, oh, interesting. What's feminine about that? Why feminine? Is that good or bad? Or, asking those types of questions, and very much you can get down to like the products, the functional product attributes, the headlights, the shape of them, if they're, square versus round. I don't know, I don't know what those would be in this. I'm not familiar with that topic, but all of those are actual product cues that you're giving off. And even the names, like you think about, a popular sports car here is the Ford Mustang. They named it that. Mustang is communicating horsepower, strength, so like, and I think then you start to design a car that you feel has, it's not curves, it's big and square, and those types of things too. So I think, with any of these kind of metaphors, it can help you start to figure out even to very specific design cues about them.
Generating product names is also something that is sort of in the realm of the subjective, and it seems like this technique, it just seems like it would be highly useful for that. Is that one of the applications that folks look to?
Yeah. Well, we've done a lot of naming research over the years, and have 3 concepts that you want to name your. It's a big decision too. I mean, we haven't done work for Ford Mustang, but that's a big decision what you're going to call this new sports car. And so we'll go out there and get, they have 3 names they want to try. And again, we haven't done that with them, but 3 names we want to try out, and we'll go out and get all the metaphoric associations, around that topic for them. And yeah, it's a really neat way to see it. That's cool. This metaphor of a Mustang conjures up all positive connotations, or there's actually some negative baggage that comes with that. It's a little too wild, or it's I don't know, but
right.
Yeah.
They should have worked with somebody like you before they named the Pinto, I think.
Right.
In that case, maybe the car, I guess the name was fine, but the car then influenced how the name was interpreted.
Yeah.
Or the gremlin,
Yeah.
So I had another question relating to the metaphor definition, and I'm going to try and see if I can express it correctly. So ultimately, in innovation and marketing too, I mean, we're trying to understand factors in how people make decisions. I mean, I think in the end, that's what it comes down to. And so decision making is taking action. And it seems to me that so a metaphor is, broadly speaking, simile, analogy, a representation of something, that's how I would express it. Maybe it's not quite right, but a metaphor is a kind of, it's nearly a function. You go from one object to another object. You represent something by something else, and so, but a representation in itself is not really sufficient, in my view, to explain action. It seems to me there's an important ingredient there that's kind of missing, which is, I mean, I can see objects, I can see things and put names on things. I can say this looks like this and all this, but it doesn't really tell me, now I'm going to do this or that. And I think the element that's missing is the idea of needs or of desire or value. And how does this come into your framework? And how does this come in and link up with the metaphors?
Yeah. So we do, and I think even jobs to be done, I mean, it's another way clients look at these things are need states. And, there's motivations, etc. There's different ways. Jobs to be done's, I think, a really good one that the industry is embracing now. But we do a lot of this kind of work where in our process, you uncover the different need states, the different needs that a category has for consumers. And it might be through the metaphor, but it also might be through laddering or whatever. And our process, by the way, metaphor elicitation generally doesn't solve all the world's problems. I mean, we're a specialized research firm that you bring us in for certain things, but not everything. And, so there's not, it's, certain things that ZMet, we would tell clients that's not good for. But needs, we do get into needs. If we're doing a study on the soft drink category, for instance, I keep using that example, but if you're doing a study on that, you'll find some needs there. It's about refreshment. It's about, and it might come from that image that, someone, diving into a pool of water. Well, what does this mean? Well, this is that, refreshed feeling I feel every time I, do that first crack of the can and drink my soft drink. What is it about that? What is that need? Why do you have that need? Well, it's usually like been a long day or whatever, or what happens after you have that need. So, but that is a need. There is refreshment as a need for this, or indulgence as a need. So we'll think of these needs, kind of different ways, but a need might be indulgence. I just need my treat. And we'll explore, why is it that you need a treat? Well, sometimes I just feel like I've earned it, and I have to kind of, so we'll get those needs, even if it might not be a metaphoric conversation, but often what we'll do when we uncover that need is we'll then use a metaphor or ask them about that. Say, what else in life gives you that same indulgent feeling that drinking your favorite soft drink does? And you'll get a cool metaphor too. Well, it's kind of like that indulgent feeling when you, take your first steps onto a beach on vacation in your bare feet. Oh, how is that similar to that? How is it? Whatever, those kind of things too, because it again gives some more context around that helps you really understand. Oh, it's that kind of a moment. So you do get into needs, but sometimes it's more of a practical conversation in there too. I don't know if does that make sense? Is that?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm trying to maybe a different way of asking a similar question is, I mean, are these metaphors always? I mean, they're not always representing needs. I mean, what do they? Maybe I'll just go into this because in your book you talk about the 7 deep metaphors, and you've mentioned now that actually I think you've extended the list slightly.
Yeah, those are 7 giants. We chose to just focus on the most common ones that come up. But even then, when we wrote the book, we knew these others ones too. Yeah.
Maybe I can just read them out so the listeners. So you've got balance, transformation, journey, container, connection, resource, and control. And I think now you've got more, but those were the 7 giants, main ones you discussed. And what I was slightly struck by when I read this was that these different things are somehow ontologically of a very different type, and some are actually I found very similar. So I actually found there were kind of maybe 2 groups. So for example, one that stuck out was container. First, a container seems to me a very different thing than balance, for example, because balance is something you want to achieve. It's some kind of goal. And a container is quote unquote a solution. And I was kind of wondering if that matters or if that doesn't matter. And how does this work in the whole context of trying to then build a solution or innovate?
Yeah. So you will see some of these deep metaphors in certain topics kind of more closely associated with each other. So like container, you'll often see control pops up there also.
Exactly.
You think about this in a health, it's we see a lot of like disease states where I got my diagnosis and I was in control of my life, and then I got this cancer diagnosis or this migraine diagnosis, whatever the severity is, diagnosis that now I feel trapped, and now I feel like I'm being attacked. And what does medication do? It kind of protects you again and lets you get back into control over your life. So, there's some common times. Now, they don't always appear together, but you'll see those. Balance and transformations, another one. Usually when you're going from an imbalanced state to a balanced state. So when you're going from tired to awake, it's because a product like coffee is transforming you from tired to awake. So, you'll often see those ones go together too. So yeah, it's good you picked up, like, those are definitely some of these kind of relationships you'll see with them. But what's neat is every study we go into, sometimes we've done a lot of work in a lot of categories, big categories over time. Now you kind of have your hunch, but we still always go in with open to whatever hits us, but you still kind of know certain things are going to come up, like container and control and healthcare issues. But then, often it'll be interesting. This particular healthcare issue has this deep metaphor of journey pop in. I've never seen that before, so that's kind of the fun of it, to see what the magic is when you pick that focus area, what the deep metaphors are activated, and more importantly, what themes of those deep metaphors are activated. Like I said, is it about self-connection or connection to others? That's kind of the context that matters. So
I love also that these deep metaphors themselves are, they're like metaphors as such. I think they are, you get a sense of them, but it's probably not possible to make it fully explicit of what they actually mean. If you could do that, then you wouldn't need the metaphor itself. So I think it's in itself something that you have to understand metaphoric, and you do understand metaphorically what is meant by it, but it's not, you never get to a point where, okay, here's the set of statements by which container is defined. If you could do something like that, you wouldn't need the metaphor. So I think I just like this. That it in itself is an interpretation in a certain sense of what that is.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel like, I don't know, I was wondering about Scott and Jonathan. So I feel like, in a sense, that the questions you're mentioning, the things that you're asking for, and the way you're asking it in the interviews, I feel like it's almost like you're asking very, very similar questions I would ask in a Jobs to be Done study, but you're listening for completely different answers. I have a very precise definition of what I'm listening for, which you could call an outcome statement or a job metric or whatever you want to call it. But you're listening for something else. And I think it is very interesting to see to what different conclusions or what kind of, because in our study, so I think what we can do very, very clearly is pick out or make conscious, even in a certain sense, what are the outcomes people expect when they want to get a job done. That is kind of the essence of what Jobs to be Done should be doing. However, I think the more abstract you get, the harder it is to really get to a certain sense of getting these outcomes out. And I think there it's probably something like the metaphor approach is much more useful, or kind of is more kind of lends itself more to think about those more general, general, I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but these more abstract kinds of things that consumers just have in their mind. Jonathan mentioned the hierarchy that we use, and that is a way of kind of linking how the different jobs relate to each other. And in the very first version, we spoke of a bigger why, a lower how, and we had a deeper why in there. Mm-hmm. So we just kind of this third dimension in there, and we never really could make explicit what we actually mean by this. So and I think these are, there's a Maslow pyramid or whatever you take, but I think maybe something like these metaphors are like a universal thing that is always attached to whatever level of job or product that you're thinking of.
Yeah, that's one way to think of it. I agree. And it's neat. Often in Jobs to be Done work that we're brought in for, there is a process already in place that's a very good way at getting at what you were just talking about, your process does. And then we're bringing some color to that, or we're bringing some overarching framework to it that all of what you're doing then kind of can be made sense of, and say, oh, it's because of this, freedom from containment that, these are about that. So often it can just be, and that's why I think it's like great when you marry up 2 or 3 different approaches to solve an issue is always better than one. Because then you get the richer portrait too. So yeah, that's neat.
I feel like it had a sorry, go on.
Pressure to put on any one study to answer everything.
Yep.
It's nice to have various ones different. I even encourage folks, go look at your warranty data. Go look at all the help desk where people have called in and complained about stuff. Grab all those things and compare them. And I was having the same thought that you had, Jan, and I think what you're about to comment on, Lindsay, before I interrupted you, that Well, obviously we sort of see things from a jobs we done lens, which is highly focused on functional things. And it's a bit ironic because today I just wrote a LinkedIn post on emotions, and it's I would say it's an undeveloped part of jobs, but maybe it's because maybe it's a hammer trying to do something a screwdriver should do. Maybe it certainly seems like this metaphor method has a lot of promise for speaking to those, and I'm highly interested in learning these 15 or 17 as we after we wrap up.
I'd go for 16.
16.
It's an uneducated guess.
I like the number 17. Whatever it is, it's going to be a cool sounding. Like, can we get to 21?
Like a prime number. It has to be a prime number.
We'll let you join in our nerdy debates at the office and see if you seem like you'd be good fits to help solve the right number of these.
About 7 minutes into this, I was like, dude, we're ready to nerd out right now. I can tell we were going to enjoy your conversation. I have a question. So for a product manager listening, and product managers are often put in the role, often don't have a lot of interviewing experience and are expected in short order to get out there, start interviewing customers, gather insights. What are a few tips you could give to a product manager as they're from within your method that they might be able to put to use in, say, their next interview or two?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite questions to ask, and it's a metaphor elicitation question, but it's a simple one, is just what else in life gives you this same experience? And I think because what you're trying to do is understand in a more nuanced way as a product manager what customers want out of an experience. And you've heard a million times what they'll say, I want it to be more reliable, or, the cost is an issue, or and that's where you kind of start zoning out even, or like, I don't know how else to ask this because I know what they're going to tell me. They're going to say, they want the better customer service or something. So that's just a great question that forces that customer to answer in a different way than they might typically. So what else in life gives you that same, or what else in life gives you the same, reliability that you'd like our product's reliability to give you? Well, it's that same, it might be another product, which is fine. It's that same reliability of when you put on your favorite, pair of shoes and you just know they're going to be comfortable and durable and get you through the day. Or it might be something more metaphoric. It's like that reliability of when, you visit your parents and you just know that they're going to be there to welcome you in. Well, that's kind of cool. And then that's, something manager you can even have a bunch, and that's what we do. And we go on from there and ask a bunch of, metaphor questions around that too. But even just that right there gets a little different of a way to kind of engage them. So that's a question I always think is important to ask as you do that. And then I think just kind of I think good product managers probably ask this anyways, but it's easy to not ask it, but just to ask why a couple times, so why do you want that? And sometimes it's really awkward because they'll say, I want a product that's more reliable. And you might say why, and you might feel like, well, obviously I know why, because they want it to work better. But it's kind of cool sometimes when you force them to, explain why, because often a product manager will just assume, well, he wants more reliable. Good to know. I know why they want that. But often, say why, and they'll say, well, because this is about an expression of who I am in my workplace. Well, that's a cool topic versus I just want to be able to do my job. And so now you've gotten to this cool place, and then say, well, why is that important to you? And you're just kind of, you don't want to ask that 20 times to that person, but once or twice, just for, managers to ask the why question, I think can often turn out some new insights.
Yeah. I think especially about the obvious things, are things that you would assume you would know. But I mean, you always have this. You can sit in an office, you can try to imagine what customers think, and you can even believe that you have caught it all. Right? From a theoretical or whatever point of view. And then you go out there, you talk to 2 or 3, and you realize there's so much more there that I kind of completely missed, would never have thought of. And that's really the beauty of talking to customers, I think.
We do this in our metaphor studies with talking to patients, sometimes with like pretty serious health issues, sometimes terminal issues even we've done in the past. But the why there is they'll say, I want to take my medication. Well, why? Well, I don't want to die. And as much as you don't want to ask it, we do.
Yeah.
And we say, why don't you want to die? I mean, at some level, it's really obvious, but their answer to it is great sometimes, because then they're like, well, I still have an impact to make on this world, or I want to be there for my family, or, and so it's one of these questions, well, why they don't want to die, but ask it anyways, because it forces you to kind of understand, is there a specific reason why? So,
yeah. I also think it helps you reframe the first question.
yeah,
Kind of asking for a second time, it helps you reframing the answer, reliability, or not dying. But that's a very different topic. But
yeah,
reliability, and then the second or third why gives you such great clues of reframing what reliability really concretely means, I think.
I'm just noodling over is just like 95% of thought is unconscious.
Oh,
you go.
I wrote that one down too.
Like it's almost like I just need to smoke something and sit back and think about that. It's like well, it's I mean, it's sort of crazy if you think about. I mean, if you just think of forgetting about research, just think about yourself. So like I'm communicating with you guys with 5%. I got 95% doing other things. I mean, I get that I have to breathe and my heart needs to pump or whatever, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's what you're referring to. I'll tell you another thought that I had. You brought up a term that came up in an earlier podcast of ours with Ronan Healy that has, I don't know if you listened to that one, but they are consultants with Lego Play. The term is embodied cognition.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do have that question. What if you could tell us a little bit more about embodied cognition and how this concept is important or relevant for at all?
Yeah, sure. So again, as I was saying before, it's tied to why we have these deep metaphors at all. Every single one of those deep metaphors can be traced back to some bodily experiences we've had almost through infancy, starting at infancy and experiencing the world, connection, literally, touching other humans, container, your mom's embrace, even starting from the womb, people would argue is already giving that, being this sense of containment, force. We all know what it's like to get hit by something. And then later on in life, you say, this idea just hit me. The reason you said that is because you have this expression of an idea hitting, if you physically being hit before, something like that, or hitting something. So all of them come from all these deep metaphors, and therefore the language we use to express these frames all come from this idea that we're bodily creatures, and we, all, again, as humans, we're all going to generally have, the four limbs and just, our bodies like that. And so all of our experiences come in through our senses, through our body, and therefore you start to think of the world that way. And I mean, it's a pretty fascinating kind of concept. I'll have to listen. I hadn't listened to that particular podcast. I know the one you were talking about from looking at them. I'll have to go back and listen to their conversation about it.
So good. I think you guys will have a lot in common in that. I mean, they're using the Legos. You build something, but you're responding to it. I think there's a lot. Yeah. There's a lot in common. For the way you approach things. We weren't able to get too deep into that there either. But I've become sort of fascinated recently with Antonio Damasio's writing. I mean, I'd read some stuff earlier. To me, it was super useful in, there's this idea that, either we're just purely functional or we just purely emotion, or one's good and one's bad. And he's the one that helped me to understand they're just all together. Or like this idea of being rational, irrational. It's like your emotions, and it's all one brain. It all works. There's different parts. There's something sight and all that, but it works together to help to make decisions. And the one of his patients, and you might be familiar with the story, there was one that had some brain damage, and he had lost all ability of emotion. And so he would show him a picture of a tragic scene or something, whatever the most horrible thing, and he would know intellectually, I'm supposed to feel something, but he felt nothing, absolutely nothing. But he knew his name. He could do everything. He had all his memory, all his intelligence, but he could make zero decisions. He couldn't choose what to eat for lunch. He couldn't choose what toothpaste he wanted. He couldn't choose to start something, to stop something. So with his emotion, without access to his emotion, he had all his intelligence, but he could not he literally was unable to, or with great difficulty, make decisions. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that story, but
I am. Yeah. He's fascinating. That's fascinating. And yeah, we're fans of Damasio's. He was actually one of the thinkers in my dad's early work, kind of pulling a lot of this together. Damasio's work feeds into a lot of this too. He's a brilliant writer.
I really like this. I mean, from a philosophical perspective, it is this embodied thinking or all that way of, thinking about thinking is really in a traditional sense, really a reversal of how we would think of the relationship between body and mind. So in a very, I think even this is because of your post, I think, on Damasio's or his book is called Descartes' Mistake, I think, or just error, exactly. So traditionally, very strongly, the relationship in philosophies, the mind is in control of the body, or even, I'm now just I have to think in all of these metaphors. I mean, Plato, I think he literally says that the body is a cage for the mind. So thinking in the sense of contain, and traditionally, it's always thought that the mind is some kind of superior to the body, and then we have to drag this thing around, blah, blah, blah. And it really starts maybe with Nietzsche or whatever. So I'm writing on Nietzsche. That's why I think it starts kind of there, because he makes a distinction between smaller reason and big reason, or small mind and big mind. And the big mind is the body, and the small mind is what we call the conscious thinking stuff. So I really like this reversal. I think where we learn more and more that the idea of that little light bulb that we have in here that we call consciousness, and we're so proud of. And of course, Freud and Jung and then the whole psychoanalytic movement kind of taught us, well, that probably is not the center of control. Let's use another kind of metaphor. So from a philosophical perspective, I really like this reversal almost of the relationship between mind and body.
Absolutely. I'll actually recommend a book that we have, and I just pulled up because I couldn't remember the author. I want to make sure. Annie Murphy Paul, but we just finished it literally last month. We finished it. We do a book club here at Olson Zaltman. Every quarter we read a book and discuss it. But the one we picked this last quarter was The Extended Mind. Yeah. And I don't know if you may have read it already too, but it talks about this concept too, even broader than our bodies being a cage for our mind, how the world is a cage for our mind, and our minds collectively, how much talk about the mind is not something contained in your brain or even your body. Your mind is everywhere. And again, kind of philosophical angle of it too, but it's a pretty fascinating book too.
Yeah. It's like the Force.
Yeah.
There's a Star Wars fan there.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned that, I was going to ask you for sort of your short list of books to read. So since you mentioned that one, what would be else on your short list?
The Illusion of Conscious Will is a good one. Some of these are heavier than others, but that's a good one. And Metaphors We Live By is one that we recommend often too. And I'm trying to think, because I know these are some of my books up here from our book club. They're either here at my home office. Robert Cialdini's obviously a famous guy, but his book Persuasion is a great one to start to think about these frames, more from a psychology perspective too. But yeah, I can actually send you, or we might even have it on our website, our book club book list, but there's some great ones. We'll draw, some of them will be business related, but most of them tend to be some sort of social or mind science applications, something from a different domain, kind of push us to think.
I love that there's this book club. Yeah. I feel like this whole podcast is also kind of one of extended book club, where at the end of each podcast, we end up with a list of books that we need to read.
I think I interrupted myself about the book, but I wanted to get that list because I had that question down. But what we were talking about before, I find myself also questioning. There's this elephant and rider metaphor that's been so popular for how we make decisions, and I mean those are they're useful, right? But it just seems I feel like it was useful to understand this elephant and rider. Well, for folks that don't know about it, the idea is like the I guess our conscious is the rider trying to direct the elephant. And so here's Scott, I want to eat, the elephant's going to go where it wants to go. So if I want the donut, with the little rider inside Scott's brain, like, no, don't do that. We got to, we're going to the beach in 3 weeks and, you're already can barely wear your bathing suit, but the elephant's like, oh, I'm going to eat it. So the elephant's sort of in control. But it's useful for understanding a few things. But I find that I'm almost more interested. I find that it's not good enough, I guess, for where I am right now. I want to better understand decision making, and so I think I really appreciate everything I feel like this has been a great conversation for me personally to help get a little further down that road.
Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree.
It's a big topic, though, isn't it? Like how people. There was a book that was sort of discredited. I don't know if you guys saw it. It was discredited because apparently there was some plagiarism, but I found it really useful. It's called How We Decide by a guy named Jonah Lair. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, Lindsay.
Yeah.
I thought it was so good. I thought it was so useful. I don't know, 15 years ago, and apparently it's a few things were made. So maybe I'm just fooling myself. The things are plagiarized, but I found it. But you know how it is when you read something that's in sync with what you already believe to be true, then you're like, God, this is brilliant. So
yeah,
confirmation bias, that could have been a problem too.
I have to ask one last question. Do you have a favorite metaphor?
It's a common question. I have a couple.
Oh, really?
I have a couple. Yeah, I mean, not a common question, but I've been asked that before, I should say, and I have a couple. And I like the container metaphor because there's a lot of great themes of it. There's positive containment, your safety net, security blanket. There's also negative containment, shackled, imprisoned, handcuffed. So there's, like, to me, a lot of richness. And I think so many of life's situations have container roots. And then the same notion, transformation. The marketer in me loves the deep metaphor of transformation because just about every product or service or experience we have in life transforms you or is intended to transform you in one way or another. Physical transformation, if it's like a coffee, or emotional transformation, whatever it is, social transformation, if it's so all of these things, I think the marketer in me always loves that one because it's always cool to see what nuances of that transformation are coming up in cosmetics versus healthcare versus, packaged goods or whatever. So
although I might add that in the cybernetics and systems thinking people, some people will say that the highest level goals is more something to do with balance, because the idea is that you try to maintain your identity and you're trying to maintain your states. Homeostasis is what we use, and the example everyone uses is obviously the thermostat, and that all these transformational goals in the end are in order to maintain a certain state or livable state, or maintain an identity.
Yeah.
So you're preferring balance? Is that what you're saying?
Well, because I think balance is for me is somehow related to homeostasis. I think this idea of maintaining yourself in a certain state, because I mean, if you change your identity, it's in somehow a kind of death, right? I mean, you're a different person, so you're a different entity. So something has disappeared and something new has come along.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah.
That's really. You're now making me think of, are some of these metaphors even like not contradictive, but like in fights? So does balance and transformation really go together, or some?
Safety and freedom,
for example.
Yeah.
Security, right, or adventure and safety.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I mean there's this psychological school called the method of levels, based on perceptual control theory, and the whole idea, but I don't think it's just them. I mean, I think others have mentioned this, but the whole idea is that a lot of our psychological problems come from conflicts between subconscious goals that we have. So you're doing something for one reason, but subconsciously you want two things that are not possible. So safety and freedom, say, and you're not conscious about it, and this creates a conflict. And I mean, it's one theory.
Well, a good point to end it, because I think we started the next 2-hour discussion at the end of discussing 2 hours. So if people want to know more about ZMAT and your agency, where can they find more about you and your approach?
Yeah, so probably the best starting point would just be to visit our website, olsenzaltman.com. And through there's a contact us. My specific contact name is also in there, and you're more than welcome to reach out directly to me. I'd love to chat with folks who want to hear more about this kind of work.
Hey, Lindsay, thank you really so much for doing this. That concludes today's Product Quest podcast with Lindsay Zaltman. Lindsay, again, well, all the thanks that we can have. I hope you enjoyed it as well. To your listeners, please send any comments, guest or topic recommendations, or any ideas for future shows to productquestpodcast@gmail.com. And see you next time.
Thank you guys so much. I enjoyed the conversation.
Really interesting.
Thanks so much, Lindsay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you so
later.
much.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.